Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's Maynard, Mike, and Colin, and we're really excited about today's show. I know I'm guilty. I always say that. But today we're going to learn something that could be really helpful to future elections. We're pleased to have with us today Harriet Wasserstrum. Harriet's the co-founder and chair of Ranked Choice Voting for Texas. She was previously a president and CEO of the American Leadership Forum. Just so you know, Ranked Choice Voting for Texas is a nonpartisan, nonprofit grassroots organization focused on getting the Texas legislature to adopt ranked choice voting. Mark Jones is also with us. He's a PhD over at Rice University's Baker Institute, and he's a fellow in political science. So we're really, really happy to have you, Harriet, and have you, Mark. If you're wondering out there, how does this all fit in to close of business and energy policy, here would be our quick explanation. What we've just witnessed with Keystone and the permitting issues and all of this stuff is a hard swing back in a different direction. And if you look at the elections we've been experiencing these big swings in different directions. And what you'll hear about ranked choice voting, Harriet, I'm trying to summarize something that is your expertise, is it is a way to choose the candidates who are most representative of all of our sentiment. And my assumption from that is we could get some more, quote, moderate people. But Harriet, is that an okay lead in? Can I get your blessing on that?
I will bless it now and then we'll elaborate later. Okay,
blessing now, elaboration later. So Harriet and Mark, get ready. We're coming. We can't wait to hear about it. Mike, talk to us, brother. I know you had a couple of topics I had on your list. DAPL and the inflationary trade. The floor is yours, sir.
Yep. We'll just quickly hit this. We sent out a note yesterday talking about DAPL because there was going to be a hearing that was going to go in front of a judge tomorrow at 11 a.m. And it was essentially putting the Biden administration, the Army Corps of Engineers, we're going to have to make a decision at that point in time whether they wanted to go ahead and shut the pipeline down while they did the EIS or allow it to stay open. That was going to happen tomorrow at 11, so we would have had a decision. Today, it looks like the DOJ, Army Corps of Engineers, wants to delay that by 58 days till April 9th. My guess is they'll probably go ahead and get that continuation, so we're probably not going to have any resolution to that for the next 58 days. The reason I think that's important is I personally think that they're not looking to shut down the DAPL pipeline. The Biden administration had never talked about it during the campaign, and I think they were kind of taken off guard that this thing came up so quickly after the election. And so I think the delay is them saying, okay, let's get our arms around this and see what we have here. Now, obviously in Washington, when you have a delay, that can bring politics into the situation, and that's a concern. So this is a big deal for the DAPL pipeline companies as well as the producers in the Bakken. So we're hoping to get something tomorrow, definitive. That looks like it's probably going to get pushed out for another 58 days. So keep your eyes open.
Mike, can I just ask you, just so we make sure we understand that the previous Justice Department was going to argue that the pipeline should be allowed to operate during the period of the EIS. And now with the change of administration, it's a little bit like they weren't sure what they were going to argue for the judge to do. So they said, please delay it. We don't want a hearing now. Is that fair?
Well, what really boils down to is the judge looked at that and said there was a federal easement issue, that the federal government could come in there and basically shut it down because of the easement issue. And he decided to let the Biden administration determine whether they wanted to shut it down through the EIS because of the easement issue or keep it open. And I think where we're coming out is that we're going to want to keep it open. So that's the gist of it.
Okay. And our inflation trade?
Yeah, I think the second thing, we've been talking about this inflation trade for the better part of 2 to 3 months. I mean, Colin's talked about it in regards to Bitcoin. We've talked about it in regard to where yields are going and just commodity prices in general. And what I'd say is the other thing, I was thinking about here in the last couple of days is that, we've been in backwardation for quite a bit of time, and we've been talking about time spreads, I think, forever. And, you're around 270, 280 in backwardation for the next 12 months. And so what it tells you is that if if nothing else happens, crude stays where it's at, you're able on the roll every month, you're going to be able to pick up a positive roll. And from an annualized basis, that's somewhere in the 8 to 9% area right now. And that's against, products that are yielding 1, 2, 3 type percent. So I do think what you're seeing here, and we've said this before, money is coming to the sector because not only inflationary trade, but now money is coming to the sector because there's a positive yield to be picked up here. If you believe prices are going to hold or not really tank from here. So I think we're seeing some money there, and it just kind of continues the whole inflationary trade, money flow coming to the group. And I think that's what we've seen so far this year.
So Mike, that 8 to 9%, if you played the role all the way through the year, how does that usually correlate to, the treasury rate, the corporate bond rate? What does that usually have some correlation to, and is it correlating like it usually does?
It's all over the place. But the issue is, if we think about it, 4 or 5 months ago, we were probably 7 or 8%, negative. And now we're, 8 to 9% positive. And so there's not much a correlation as I can see it. The difference is, people are chasing yield right now. There is yield to be had here. And I think it's an interesting play. So
in a world with very limited yield.
Yeah, what I would say is, back at the end of 2019, early 2020, we were in a positive yield scenario too, and we had money coming into the energy sector and into in crude oil. And so I think we're seeing the same thing. It's just a bit higher yield at this point in time, and we still have rates that are very, very low. Okay,
Colin, I know you've got a surprise for us, and I know I tried to bait you into talking about Tesla and Bitcoin, and you refused. So first of all, I'm proud of you for not giving in to my Bitcoin madness. And secondly, I'm excited to see what you came up with.
Thanks, Maynard. Well, this week, I thought it'd be interesting to focus in on 2 commercials that came from the Super Bowl. They were both about automobiles. The first one is No Way, Norway. If you've seen it, it features Will Ferrell saying, "We're coming for you, Norway," with respect to EVs. And the other was The Middle, which featured Bruce Springsteen in his first commercial ever in support of Jeep. And 2 major ideas really struck me. The first was No Way, Norway reminded me a lot of the famous Hey Kid Catch commercial from 1979, Super Bowl 14, when Mean Joe Green of the Pittsburgh Steelers tossed his jersey in thanks to a kid who had given him a Coke. It was iconic, it was feel good, it was funny. Here we are, 41 years later, and many advertisers within that industry still view it as the best Super Bowl commercial ever. I have a feeling that the 8 or 9 or 10-year-olds of today, fast forwarding in time, will remember this funny commercial featuring the Saturday Night Live players. It was funny and really speaks to the ethos of the day. But The Middle really also caught my attention because it's so focused on a reflective mood and a mood of reconciliation. It's about the now, whereas the EVs are about the future. And in supporting Jeep, Bruce Springsteen really is emphasizing this idea of the middle, which we talk about so often on this show, and which we're going to talk about here with our guests today. And it really says something. We all know that Bruce Springsteen supports the left side of the aisle. He was in support of Hillary Clinton, but he and his team really wanted to go out of their way. And here's what the Jeep people said about it to emphasize the middle. Yes, Springsteen, takes a stand, but he takes a stand for the middle, Francois said. That's the chief marketing officer for Stellantis, the former Fiat Chrysler. It is not liberal. It is not Republican. It is just something that is trying to stand for the non-political, the common ground. And, I think that's resonating with a lot of people. When you look at the YouTube play of this commercial, it's been viewed 36 million times in 2 days. The Super Bowl audience itself was 96 million people. So something about this ad is resonating with tens of millions of people in our country. And one last point, Maynard, you and I remember the 1979 Pittsburgh Steelers. Maybe some members of the audience don't. But the ad agency that put together Hey Kid Catch is the same ad agency that put together No Way, Norway, McCann Worldwide. And some other things they did were the Esso ad in 1964. That's the famous "Put a Tiger in Your Tank." They did 2 other liquids ads in 1971. Coca-Cola, "It's the Real Thing," and I'd like to buy the world a Coke, that famous Hilltop ad. In 2006, they delivered U.S. Army's Army Strong. And finally, in 2017, they partnered with State Street to unveil Fearless Girl, that statue of the young girl staring down the bull statue near Wall Street. So this is a very impressive ad agency that's responsible for many iconic logos, images, ideas in our culture. And I think it's important for us to take a moment out and note what they've delivered to us this time.
Well, that was awesome, Colin. I can tell you, I'm at least one of those 36 million. I love the commercial. It was really interesting, and it was really striking. Also, speaking of the 79 Steelers, the Onion's headline today was, Terry Bradshaw says, this confirms it. Tom Brady really is the second best quarterback ever. So anyway, thanks for the lead in, guys. Okay, let's get down to business and make the world a better place. Harriet, Mark, welcome. We're so glad to have you. And Harriet, I think you've also told us you brought some slides to get us all a little smarter on this concept you've got going.
Okay, well, thanks so much for inviting us to join you. A couple of years ago, I decided that I either needed to stop complaining about our political environment or I needed to try to do something about it. And my basic contention is that I don't think the two major parties are going to heal themselves. So I decided to work to change the logistics of voting and try to get Texas to adopt ranked choice voting. Problem is that our current voting systems encourage negativity and discourage compromise. And while there are extremist groups on both the left and the right that may be a small sliver of total voters, they can be a powerful bloc in elections with multiple candidates. So this gets to what Colin was saying about the middle. So ranked choice voting, I think, can help. So our current voting system, the major way that we vote in Texas is a two-round runoff where majority wins. So if you voted in the primaries last March in Texas, if no candidate got a majority, then the top two vote getters wound up in a runoff. And voters are sometimes reluctant to vote for a candidate who they think won't get into a runoff because they don't want to waste their vote. So they wind up voting for the major party candidate they dislike less, so they don't help elect the candidate they dislike more. And that's a very unsatisfying way to vote. And also, if there's more than one candidate with similar positions, they wind up splitting the vote so they can help elect an opponent who garners only a minority of support. So in 2020, for federal elections in Texas, these are for like US House seats, there were 9 Republicans and 6 Democratic House seats that wound up in a runoff, as well as the Democratic primary for US Senate. There were many more runoffs in the Texas legislature. Runoffs are costly in terms of time and money for election administrators, candidates, and voters. And they often are low turnout. So even if someone in a runoff actually gets a majority of the votes, they still might get elected without broad voter support. So lots of people think that this two-step process doesn't really enable them to vote for their true preference, and voter turnout is low. So the other way we vote now in Texas is first past the post. So if you voted in November for Texas state representatives and senators, this is how it worked. So voters vote for the candidate of their choice, and the candidate receives the most votes wins, even if they don't get a majority of the votes. If there are 3 or more candidates, we really never know who a majority of the voters prefer. So let me just use one example. In District 47, Vicki Goodwin, a Democrat, won with 49% of the vote. Her Republican opponent got 48%, and a Libertarian got the difference. So you really wonder who the Libertarian voters' second choice would have been. So there really is a better voting system, and it's called ranked choice voting. It's also known as instant runoff voting. So first of all, it saves money and time for election administrators, for candidates, and for voters. The other thing about ranked choice voting is that it assures that you get a majority winner, with voters only having to go to the poll once. And voters get greater choice because candidates don't have to fear having their voters split among several candidates with similar ideologies. So more people are willing to run without fear of getting a candidate elected who really doesn't represent the majority of the voters. So this whole process makes voters feel better about being able to select a candidate who they really like, and that leads to greater voter participation. And my favorite about it is that because candidates are interested in getting not only first choice votes, but second and third choice votes, they are less likely to go negative and more likely to stay focused on issues. So before I get into the details of how it works, I want to address first one of the major concerns that gets raised whenever we talk about ranked choice voting, and that's the concern that it is not a nonpartisan electoral change. So if we go back to the presidential election in 1992, where Perot was a significant vote getter, if the election had been run with ranked choice voting, chances are a lot of Perot's voters would have placed H.W. Bush as their second choice. And if that had been the case, probably Bush would have won over Clinton. So here you have an example of ranked choice voting where it would have favored the Republicans. Then, if you go to the election of 2000, people who voted for Nader would have had Al Gore as their second choice. And therefore, if we had had ranked choice voting, probably Gore would have won over George W. Bush. So ranked choice voting sometimes can favor Republicans, sometimes it can favor Democrats, but in each case, you wind up with a candidate that really garners the majority of voter support. So exactly how does it work? So voters get a ballot and they rank candidates in order of choice without fear of helping elect the candidate they like least. Voters can rank as many or as few of the candidates as they want, and they just have to be careful not to vote for more than one candidate in a single column or for the same candidate in more than one row. Then the votes are counted. All first choice votes are counted, and if candidate gets more than half of the votes, they win, just like in any other election. In this example, no one gets a majority of the votes, so you go to the first instant runoff. And what happens then is the candidate who received the fewest votes is eliminated. So in this example, the 15 voters who picked candidate D as their number one choice will have their votes count for their number two choice. When those 15 votes are redistributed, you look to see if there's a majority winner. In this case, there isn't, so you go to a second iteration of an instant runoff. Here you redistribute the votes of the lowest vote-getting candidate, and now you have a majority winner. So where is ranked choice voting used today? The map that you see looks really busy, and that's good news because it shows that ranked choice voting is used broadly throughout the country in different variations. The most extensive implementation is in Maine, where it is used for federal as well as some local elections. Ranked choice voting was used in 5 states in the 2020 Democratic presidential primaries, and that worked really well. It's been used in about 20 cities scattered around the United States, some of which have used it for decades. The biggest recent addition is New York City, where it was used for the first time just last week in a special election in Queens, New York. It's also used in 5 southern states for military and overseas voters only. And Alaska just approved ranked choice voting for use in all elections. In Texas, the only place it's used is within the Democratic Party for statewide elected officials within the party. Other than for public elections, in Texas, it's used in all major universities in Texas for student government elections. At University of Texas, Rice, A&M, and University of Houston, they use ranked choice voting to elect their student government officers. And it's also used by the Academy Awards for the selection of the best movie of the year. Ranked choice voting really is a nonpartisan change in voting logistics. It results in election of a candidate whose positions are more broadly supported. As I said, sometimes it helps Democrats, sometimes Republicans, depending on who the other candidates are. We have 3 bills in the Texas legislative session right now. One is for military and overseas voters to eliminate the need for a runoff. One is for party primaries. And the last one is for nonpartisan municipal and school district elections, where an individual jurisdiction will be able to opt in to use ranked choice voting. By allowing people to express their preferences, ranked choice voting encourages more people to vote. It encourages more candidates to run. It encourages candidates to appeal to a broader coalition, which means you have friendlier political campaigns, and it eliminates the cost of runoff elections. All of these benefits can make our democracy work better. And going back to Colin's Super Bowl ad, it can really help strengthen the middle, not because you elect candidates who are only moderate, but because you're more likely to elect candidates that are issue focused and willing to talk to people throughout the political spectrum. So how can you help? We'd love for you to become a supporter. You can learn more about ranked choice voting on our website, rcvfortexas.org, where you can sign up for our newsletter. You can follow us on social media, and you can let your elected representative know that you support ranked choice voting. And we've got an easy way for you to do that once you sign up on our website. And of course, we're always happy to have you contribute to support our outreach efforts. But we really are looking for people not only to support us, but really to advocate for us. So you can share our posts on your social media, tell your friends and colleagues about ranked choice voting. And right now, we're looking for some people to help us recruit Texas legislators to co-sponsor and support our bills.
Well, thank you, Harriet. That's a great walkthrough to get our juices flowing on this. Mark, let me jump to you. I'll go back to my Rice days. Dr. Jones, we're all students here. You're a political scientist. What do you make of this? What have been the historical arguments around this? What's your take?
Well, we've had a discussion and promotion of ranked choice voting, which originally was called instant runoff voting in the United States, which is a different form that's called the alternative vote in other countries, places like Australia, for instance. The idea here in the United States was that with our current single-member plurality systems that dominate our election for most offices, as we pretty much throughout the United States elect most people, it's one candidate's elected, and whoever gets the most votes wins. It's a plurality. You don't even need to get a majority. That system's pretty archaic, and what we're seeing globally is over the past 40 years, the few countries that have been using it have been shifting away from single-member plurality systems, going to proportional representation or other choice-type methods, like the single transferable vote or ranked choice voting. But one thing that in the United States, reformers have realized, and this is particularly the Center for Voting Democracy, which later became Fair Vote, what they've realized is that in the United States, we're not getting rid of the single-member districts. That is, we're pretty much stuck with them. That is, at least in the medium term, there's no way to make a dramatic change to the electoral reform. So the idea is take some baby steps. That is, what can we do in an intermediate way to reform the electoral system within the constraints that we have? And that's where ranked choice voting comes in. And that it's a reform that is easier to implement within the single-member districts that Americans are accustomed to, but can have some benefits. I think its biggest benefits are primarily in the areas of, for instance, as Harriet was mentioning, nonpartisan elections like cities, like City of Houston, for instance, uses nonpartisan elections, as well as other Texas municipalities for all their local elections, not county elections, but the city elections. In party primaries, you also have the opportunity to implement it. And the reason there that it's very beneficial is that in a general election, at least in the current two-party system, you have partisanship as a guide. And usually you only have two choices, often maybe a couple minor party choices. But for voters, it's pretty easy to vote efficiently there. It's much tougher in city elections and in primary elections where you no longer have the party label to help orient you. And you often are going to find yourself stuck with 5 or 6 candidates and no really efficient way to ensure that the candidate supported by the most voters actually is elected. because you can quite easily get two candidates that get into the runoff and a third candidate that's left out of the runoff. But if the voters had actually had been able to go to their second choices, that third person would have gotten the most votes. So instant runoff voting or ranked choice voting allows to essentially resolve some of the inefficiencies occasioned by single member districts. You can't resolve them completely, but especially for party primaries and nonpartisan elections where you often have 5, 6, 7 candidates, it provides a more efficient way for people's preferences to be expressed. And as Harriet also mentioned in her presentation, in those elections, it also will reduce negative campaigning because there's a strong incentive by the candidates to want to get the second or third choices of some of their rivals. So they will tend to avoid negative campaigning with the goal of actually picking up those second or third preferences, which often are the difference between victory and defeat. Now, the lowest hanging fruit of the reforms that Harriet mentioned is simply to allow people, military and overseas, to use ranked choice voting like in other states. And that's more just a convenience in that there's a large delay between the first round and the runoff. And often the ballots can't get back in time for the runoff, or it's a very limited amount of time. So it's just a convenient way for people who are abroad to express their preferences and make sure that their true preferences are actually reflected in the actual runoff outcomes. But in terms of overall effect, it's a pretty trivial reform in that while it's a step in the right direction, it's not going to have any major change on the overall electoral system.
But if you're just listening to it, if you're a state, you could try that and kind of see how it goes and get a feel for it, before you start doing it more broadly. So it seems like it's a nice step to test it so you can see, and especially if you have critics that say that it's too confusing for voters or too many votes are wasted or it's not easy to implement. It's a good way to show it is. I mean, there's this classic John Cleese from Monty Python, a video where he was supporting election reform in United Kingdom in the 80s, where he says effectively that, yes, that there's this critique that you all say that people say it's too hard for voters. And he says, yes, if you can't count to 5, it's going to be pretty baffling. But I think, everyone can count to 5. And if you can count to 5, you can engage in ranked choice voting. Now, I do, though, want to highlight ranked choice voting does, though, require a little more voters in order for them to utilize it to its full potential. Now, that's not to say one critique of it will be that, well, voters aren't able, when they get to their third or fourth choice, they don't know what to do. And so they aren't able to actually use their preferences down at that level. But in a normal system, they just get one choice. So that's a somewhat red herring of a critique in that regardless, you're never going to get worse, and you likely are going to get a little better. But it does require voters, if they're going to fully utilize it, to know a little more about the voters, about the candidates, because ideally, you want them to be able to at least get down to the third or fourth choice, because depending on how many candidates you have, like in New York, in the Democratic primary in the mayoral election in June, we're going to have 10 pretty significant candidates, people who are running serious campaigns, and 10 other candidates who are more gadflies, meaning that it's quite possible that the person who actually wins is going to win on the fourth or fifth preference. Out in San Francisco, when we recently had elections, London Breed, the current mayor, wrote one, I think, on the 9th or 10th. They'd eliminated every candidate except for the final 2, and she narrowly won. So it is, to the extent to which voters are going to utilize it to its full potential, they need to learn about the candidates. But that's not to say that the critique that votes are wasted is true. It's false in the sense, as long as they can do one, they're essentially doing the exact same thing they would do in any other election. And so when you've seen or the look at the data from ranked choice voting in any context, whether it's, any of the places that you've mentioned, what percent of the people, utilize all those choices? Is it like some big group of them still just vote for one and they're out of there? Or what's been the experience so far on the people actually utilizing all those choices?
Well, people usually, there are different types of ranked choice voting. So there's a limited version, which is technical name is the supplementary vote, where you get 3 choices and then you stop. So you only go to 3. the pure version of it would be that you have the ability to rank all of the candidates. If there are 20 candidates, you get 20 choices. Most people utilize the choice options. That is, it's pretty rare that people just vote for one candidate. Most, though, don't go all the way down and rank every candidate. Usually that's not necessary, although, that's just a personal choice for the voters. And it in some ways it's rational as well. Once you get to a certain point, if you're completely indifferent between the final candidates, then it's a completely rational thing not to cast a vote at all because you don't care. I mean, if I'm indifferent between 4 candidates, then it doesn't really matter who wins. And so it's not necessarily a wasted vote. It's only a wasted vote is if I have a preference between those candidates and I don't utilize it. But we do see voters are able to utilize the system. It does, though, take and require a public education campaign. So the San Francisco Board of Elections has done a fantastic job educating voters about ranked choice voting in San Francisco. And those education campaigns have been successful and voters know how to use it strategically. In fact, in the most recent mayoral election, you had sort of the second and third place candidates had an informal pact, and their campaign slogan was effectively, vote for me, but if you don't vote for me, vote for her. And vice versa, vote for me, and if you don't vote for me, vote for him, as a way so they campaigned together in a way that they both were competing against each other, but they also were sort of working with each other to get the second place votes because they were London Breed, remember, is the conservative that won in San Francisco, meaning that she's way to the far left. She's not just off the ideological plane on the far left like everybody else in San Francisco. She's just a far left. We call her an extreme leftist here in Texas, but in San Francisco, she's considered a moderate.
I was wondering how we were going to weave a San Francisco discussion into our topic today, which is the middle. But we've got the middle of the far left one.
But the thing is, for San Francisco, that's the middle. For us, it would be, we'd have people in the streets with AR-15s if someone like her was elected. But for San Francisco, it's that's the middle to the center right. But what it showed was that there was support in San Francisco for what for San Francisco residents is a centrist option. That is, I guess, where, there's actually rule of law, or at least a little bit of rule of law.
And most implementations don't even allow voters to vote for 20 people if there are 20 candidates on the ballot. It's usually limited to 3 or 5, so it's really more manageable. And also, you don't want to make the ballot itself look so overwhelming. Yeah.
So, Harriet, one question for you, and I know Colin and Mike are going to jump in here. You mentioned, one reason you got into this is you were kind of tired of complaining about politics and you wanted to make it better. And, it looks like this system does try to address some of the problems with the parties and how the edgier group within both parties tend to control the party, and, it addresses it. Did you entertain looking at other things like, I don't know, I'll throw one out. If in primaries, independents can vote and not just party members, or did you think about other ways to drive these kind of moderate, thoughtful solutions that you think ranked choice drives?
It was really a 2-dimensional thing. One is what I thought would work, and one is what I thought might actually be approved in Texas. And I think in Texas, our parties are really sacrosanct. So anything that would open the primaries up across parties, I think has less of a chance to get approved. So if we could just influence the behavior of the major parties to have them nominate candidates that have broader support, that would be a good thing. So I'm really taking a pragmatic approach.
So that's the idea of opening up primaries it's the open primaries movement, which is sort of linked somewhat to ranked choice voting. That is, they tend to have similar supporters. The Arnold Foundation has been very supportive of open primaries throughout the country. And the idea there is that in some states, Texas not being one of them, you can only vote in a primary if you're a member of that party, if you're registered. In Texas, we don't have registration by party, so anybody can vote in any primary. So I can vote in the Democratic primary, I can vote in the Republican primary. I just can't vote in the runoff of the party that I voted, of another party. If I vote in their March election, I can't vote in another party's runoff. But so for Texas, that reform wouldn't have any effect because we already have open primaries. And so if you're going to pursue that in Texas, we've already reached that. That would be a reform that you might advocate in a place like New York or some of the Northeast states where you can only vote in the primary of a party to which you're registered.
But if you have a jungle primary where you have people from all parties in a single election, as opposed to a Republican primary and a Democratic primary, then that is more of a threat to our current parties. And I think it's an unnecessary threat right now. I think there's reform that can be made within the structures of the two parties to just get better candidates, which is what I'm aiming for.
So one question for you guys, Colin, I'll throw you the ball next. One thing that's always annoys everybody about the presidential elections, the last however many, 5 or 6 of them, it's like whatever it is, 15 states get all the action and no Republicans go to California, no Democrats go to Texas or Mississippi, et cetera. Like how could we change that so that the whole country, do you see ranked choice voting playing a role in that?
No, ranked choice voting really can't have any effect there. If you wanted, there are really 3 ways you can get rid of that. Right now, the incentives for the parties are to compete in the states that are close, the battleground states, and that have a decent number of electors going to the Electoral College. So Florida, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Georgia, that type of thing. If you wanted to implement a reform to ensure that the states are to ensure that the candidates paid closer attention to the states, the easiest reform, or not the easiest, the simplest way to do it would be to get rid of the Electoral College and go to a straight national vote. And there you could use ranked choice voting. But to reform the Electoral College requires 2/3 vote in the House, 2/3 in the Senate, and then 3/4 of the states on board. That's never going to happen. Therefore, within there, the one thing you could do, though, is every state does have the ability to do what Nebraska and Maine do, and that is to have, and Maine uses ranked choice voting for this. That is, in each, you have 2 electors allocated at the statewide level, and then 1 in each congressional district. So Texas, instead of allocating our 38 electors all to whoever wins the plurality vote in Texas, could allocate 36 in the 36 congressional districts and then 2 statewide. And there you could use ranked choice voting to whoever gets the most votes. That's a reform that some states are considering now, but that's about as much as you could hope for.
Well, as long as we're doing hope, can I just do one fantasy question with you on ranked choice voting? If the primaries of either party, as you said, Harriet, it encourages more candidates and it encourages more voters. So perhaps more conservative Democrats might run in the primaries, and more leftward-leaning Republicans might run in the primaries if they thought through this ranked choice voting, we're going to get some of those votes, and then if those type of people won the candidate, became the candidate of their party, maybe a, leftward-leaning Republican could win California, or maybe a rightward-leaning Democrat could win Texas, and then you might change the system without having to do this, constitutional change. Or is this total fantasy? And if this were class, Dr. Jones, you'd say, you may sit down now, Mr. Holt, you're incorrect.
No, I think that's really what we're aiming for, to move away from the greater voice that people in primaries, even though everyone has tried to increase primary participation over the years. So you tend to get people at the extremes of both the Democratic and Republican Party get nominated through the primary process. I think this process is more likely to get you that more conservative Democrat or the more liberal Republican that you're desiring. And if you look back at the candidates who ran in the 2020 Democratic primary, there were a bunch of moderate Democrats. And if you had ranked choice voting and people voted one after another for each of those candidates, one of them might have survived longer in the process.
Yeah, picking up on that thread, it seems like the current system reinforces the perceived need to have two parties and to have that consolidation happen earlier. And so you have to make all these decisions 6, 12, 18 months before an election. Has there been any experience from those places that have done ranked choice voting where you start getting more parties? So it's not just two parties, but now there are 3 or 4. And it also strikes me that with the system we have now, we have a major US state, California, has had 2 recall efforts of its governor, its chief executive in 20 years, whatever the number is. And is there any experience where with ranked choice voting, you don't get these kind of dramatic, let's pull the person down that we just installed a couple of years earlier?
I think if we're thinking about sort of minor parties or additional parties outside of 2 parties, would really be a 2-step process. What ranked choice voting it's sort of a way station between our current relatively archaic single-member plurality districts and a more proportional multi-member districts such as used in most of the democracies of the world. What ranked choice voting would allow you to do is not going to change the composition too much. What we've seen is generally the top parties will still win in that final outcome, in when it's partisan, where we have partisan elections. Most of the uses in the United States are actually nonpartisan. They tend to be used in municipalities that have nonpartisan elections. But when it is partisan, what it does allow, though, is for people to express their sincere preference for a party other than, say, the Democratic or Republican Party without being afraid that that's going to be a wasted vote. And so in theory, over time, what you would start to see is if a party starts to get a lot of support, you're going to start to see it registered at 10, 15, 20%. At that point, that can lead to a groundswell of support for real electoral reform, because then the argument you can make is this party is getting 15 or 20% of the vote, but yet it's still getting none of the seats or one of the seats. So that it would really be sort of a 2-step process that then you would use that as a justification for why deeper electoral reform was needed. And by having this way station of getting at least a little closer to proportionality, Americans might be a little more comfortable with making that next step, which is really where the world's going. That is the number of countries that are consolidated democracies that still use single-member plurality districts like we do in the United States, Canada, Jamaica, and the United Kingdom. And even the United Kingdom, for Welsh, Scottish, and Northern Ireland elections, they use a form of proportional representation. So there are fewer and fewer countries that still use single-member plurality districts like we do in the United States. This wouldn't change the party system overnight, but it might start the process if there is genuine support out there for third parties or additional minor other parties. This would allow voters to sincerely vote for those parties without fear that vote's going to be essentially used. Let's say I want to vote for a Green Party candidate because I think Democrats are, in league with the oil companies or something. I can do so without the fear that in doing so, I'm going to lead to even a Republican I consider to be even worse getting elected.
And if you look at the U.S. Senate race that Susan Collins was in last November, there was a Green Party candidate in the race. So it was a Democrat, a Republican, a Green Party, and an independent who leaned conservative. The Green Party candidate campaigned saying, vote for me, but as your second choice, pick the Democrat. And all 4 candidates were included in the debates that were held before the election. So I think they felt really much better about the whole process because they had a seat at the table. And part of the problem that third-party candidates now find is that they don't like being called spoilers. They think that some people honestly want to vote for their positions. So then to blame them for spoiling an election doesn't seem fair to them. So this gives them a leg up. And it also, ranked choice voting is information rich. So right now, the two major parties don't even know how many people don't like the candidates they ultimately nominate, because a lot of us just hold our nose and vote for the candidate we dislike less for fear of helping elect the candidate that we dislike more. So once you have ranked choice voting, you can learn a lot about the issues that people care about and the candidates that are getting nominated.
Boy, that's a great point, Harriet, because, you know, everybody who gets elected seems to think they have a mandate. That was awesome.
You know, I remember when Ralph Nader ran in 2000, I remember that, how upset he was at being called a spoiler. I mean, he won, I forget the exact number, 4 percentage points. I mean, how many have any of us won?
I think he won like 1.7, 2%.
2%? Okay. Still, 2%. I mean, most human beings ever have 1-0. He did it, you know, he did what he did.
But as far as Al Gore was concerned, Ralph Nader was the spoiler, because he garnered more votes than the difference between the Democratic and the Republican candidates. So that's really not fair to the third party candidate.
Yeah. Right. And it also one advantage is if you're including them in the ranked choice, if people have the sincere option of voting for them in the first round, it gets tougher for TV stations or people who run debates to exclude them, because they are legit. You can't say they aren't going to have an effect, because people can cast a vote for them in the first place and still not waste their vote. And so it leads to more involvement and starts to at least break down the vicious circle that non-major party candidates find themselves in, and that they don't get any media coverage. So therefore people say they're not serious. Therefore they don't get any media coverage. Therefore they're not serious. And as a result, voters never know who they are. And so it at least opens the door a little bit. And it's, in some ways, it's a test, as Harriet was mentioning. If there is really no genuine support for the Green Party or the Libertarian Party or the Constitution Party, you're going to see it. Their candidates are going to get 1 to 0% of first preferences, in which case, you know, the people they're putting up have no support, and that they really don't have any complaints about the system being biased against them, because there's no support there.
So we're all being very Texas-centric here, but I just want people to know that there are ranked choice voting initiatives currently in state legislatures in 20 states around the country. So, you know, we're looking for support in Texas for what we're trying to accomplish here. But if you're not in Texas and want to help advance the movement, then go to fairvote.com to find out what states are doing what and how you can get involved.
Well, that's a great point, Harriet. We pride ourselves on being a global telecast, so thank you for saying that. You know, so one question, or maybe it's an observation: do you find that ranked choice voting is most likely to catch on in a state which is kind of a 50-50 place and neither party feels threatened, or is there really no rhyme or reason as to why ranked choice voting catches on in certain places? Because I assume if a state which is, you know, one party is really doing well, you know, they don't think we need to make any changes.
Yeah, I mean, you do. I mean, Maine has had a long history of, like, Angus King electing independents or having independent candidates play a prominent role. And so making the case in a state like Maine that a non-Democrat or Republican could affect the outcome of the race, and that it would be more efficient. So, and Maine has sort of often found itself in the worst of all worlds, where you have someone elected governor, what's the guy, LaPierre, was the Republican. They're elected governor with 38% of the vote or 36% of the vote. And looking at the other candidates, it seems pretty clear, while you don't know it for sure, but looking at public opinion polls, you realize that this person who won wasn't necessarily wasn't preferred by a majority of Maine residents. So when you've had, I mean, what we often refer to that'd be like sort of a coordination failure. When you've had a coordination failure in a state and a politician who doesn't have majority support has nevertheless won, it makes it a little easier to make the argument for change, because you can say that the current Maine system, or the previous Maine system, did not handle independent candidates or minor party candidates. Right? It wasn't able to bring them into the system in an efficient and optimal way, and so it's easier to make the argument for that. It'd be the same in mayoral elections, where you have lots of candidates, and so you see a candidate who wins seems to be a candidate who may not have majority support. But at the local level, it just takes sort of one or two key political actors in support, as well as grassroots support. So like in the cities, it often just takes a local base that really is pushing it, and someone in power that's at least receptive to it. But at the statewide level in Maine, I think it probably took having the preconditions there. But now that Maine has the system, though, that's one of the great things about the United States and a federal democracy, in that we now have the laboratory of Maine to see how does ranked choice voting work there. And if it's successful, then that will aid the efforts of people in other states to promote it in their state, because they can point to the success of the case of Maine.
And really, ranked choice voting has been approved in very red Utah for adoption at the county level. It's been approved in red Alaska for federal and local elections. It's been, I think California has more city implementations of ranked choice voting than any other state. And obviously California is quite blue. So it depends on which version of ranked choice voting you're trying to implement. But really, it is just a better way to help you sort through candidates.
Do you think, what's the biggest, most real criticism when people say, I don't think we should do this? Is there one that sticks out that's, the thing we should be the most concerned with as we consider adopting this? Or
I would say probably the major critique is the informational requirements placed on voters are a little greater. That is, for voters to actually, but like I said, that's in some ways it's a false critique, because the requirements aren't any higher than they are in a first past the post system or runoff system. But to use the system properly, you have to be able to know enough about the candidates to say rank your top 3 or your top 4. To the extent to which you can't do that, or you don't have the information to do that, it is going to lead to some inefficiencies. You also do lack the ability. The runoffs can be negative in the sense, some of the negative effects of runoffs are they tend to have much lower voter turnout. You can get the two candidates there may not be the first and second preferences of a majority of people, but it does allow you to have sort of an extra look or a closer look at the actual candidates in a more refined setting, where instead of having 12 mayoral candidates, you have 2 to focus in on. And so if there are any skeletons, if there's anything, that scrutiny may provide some benefits. Those would probably be I think the 2 major concerns you would have. One would be that the informational requirements placed on voters, and the other would be lacking that sort of bright spotlight that you get in a runoff. Although often that bright spotlight will be on it, but nobody's watching because nobody cares to vote in the runoffs. And especially like in Houston, in our city elections, if we don't have a mayoral runoff at the same time, turnout for those races is pathetic. We're talking like 2 or 3% of registered vote.
Maybe if I could pick up on one point about the Electoral College. New Mexico has, 2 million residents. Wyoming has a very small population as well. And one of the concerns of the more lightly populated states is if we did remove the Electoral College by a constitutional process, it would only further, reweight the system to the coast. How do you think about, or what sort of empirical evidence would you point to where maybe it's at the primary process for president, one of those dozen candidates would now actually be talking to the people of Wyoming, New Mexico, and beginning to focus on energy issues where if those states were not one of the swing states may not get airplay. Have you done any work on, is this something that could lead to the Electoral College actually being abolished?
No, I think the reasons you mentioned are why. Since every state has 2 senators, regardless of population, and then the other delegates to the Electoral College are the 435 U.S. House members, all of the smaller states are overrepresented in the Electoral College. So even if New Mexico or Wyoming are getting somewhat ignored now, they know they would get even more ignored if there was a popular vote. And that's especially the case. Maybe Wyoming, can say, well, it doesn't really matter. We get ignored every way. If you're in New Mexico, though, the candidate, the Trump campaign actually paid a little bit of attention in New Mexico this cycle. And New Mexico's traditionally been a state that you can't ignore, although it's not a top state. and Montana fell in that category this time around. All of those states, the thing that's standing in the way of the Electoral College are, first, the very small states know that if it goes to a nationwide vote, their even minimal influence they have now becomes even smaller. The second is, right now, the Electoral College has a built-in Republican advantage. That may not be the case going forward, but right now it does. So even if you're a big state like Texas, you may not want to move to away from the Electoral College because right now the Electoral College has a Republican bias. Now, in 20 years, it may not have a Republican bias anymore, but right now it does. And that means that if you keep in mind that you have to get 3/4 of the states to sign off on this, between the small states and the red states, plus the states that like being in the limelight, like Florida, there just isn't a constituency out there for any type of reform to the Electoral College. For instance, Secretary Baker doesn't even want to talk about it. He just says whenever I bring it up or my colleague John Williams brings it up, he says, y'all wasting your time. We're never going to reform. That's not going to happen. So move on to something more concrete. And this is James Baker, which means he's 100% right because Secretary Baker doesn't make mistakes.
Well, that might be a pretty good place to end. Harriet, anything that you'd leave us with as we wrap up?
I think that just the partisan divide that we have now is very painful to watch. And our democracy isn't necessarily threatened, but we can certainly do a better job of running it. And ranked choice voting isn't a silver bullet, but I think it's one step in the right direction to make our democracy work a little better.
Well, that's great. Well, we sure appreciate you, Harriet, and you, Mark, and we really appreciate the spirit that you started the show with, Harriet, which is you wanted to make it better, and so you got involved, and that's such a neat thing. So all hail the middle. Today was about the middle. And we'll go back to Colin to your, I'm a sucker for a Jeep commercial, so it was a great place to start. But thank you guys so much for what you're doing, and I hope everybody enjoyed this. And reach out to the Ranked Choice Voting homepage as you have questions and want to learn more. Or Fair Vote, right, Harriet?
If you're outside of Texas, go to Fair Vote.
You're outside of Texas. So thanks, everybody.